Welcome to True Crime and Wine. I am Sherrilyn, and I am so glad you found me. I really am. And last week, I loved all the new highs. So keep those up if you can, if you want. I am trying my best still to go through all of them, but I loved seeing like so many new names and how long you've been here. And it just made my whole night, whole day, because we uploaded during the day, but I still see them. It makes my whole all day. Okay. All right. Love you. Okay. We're going to get into it. Today is a heavy one. I mean, they all are, but particularly today is sensitive as it involves babies. You know, I struggle telling child cases on this channel. It's probably why I'm a little bit like sweaty and stuff like that, because I don't want to break down and just completely lose it. I'm going to try my best. But this case it's been highly requested. And for the sake of just spreading awareness, preventing something this horrific from ever happening again, I feel it's important to talk about today. So we are going to, before we get into the heaviness of today, I want to quickly switch tones, as Swoop would say. I've been watching a lot of Swoop lately, and talk about today's sponsor with you. Thank you to Love and Pies for sponsoring today's video. I have been so excited to talk to you guys about this. If you've been here for a while, you know I love me my mobile tablet games. Among my faves are like the merge two games, you know, where you merge two items and then they turn into another item, and then you merge more to get a bigger item. I find it so relaxing, so satisfying, which is what Love and Pies is. It's a free to download merge 2 game. I cannot recommend this enough. I cannot stop playing. Lately, it's been my go-to in between really heavy research days, particularly when I just need a breather. I used to just scroll aimlessly on social apps, and then usually I'd come across something that would just trigger me, so completely counterproductive. And then I found this game, and it's my new zen. Brief synopsis: it revolves around the engaging story of taking over your mother's burnt down cafe that was mysteriously set on fire by an arsonist. And not only are you unraveling the mystery surrounding the fire, but also your mom's disappearance. On top of that, you've got this daily chaos of small town gossip and also an unexpected romance. Just when I think I have things figured out, something else just comes into play and I'm like, okay, well, can't be them, but everybody is a suspect. It's really like this gameplay experience that just like keeps you on the edge of your seat while also keeping you engaged in the game and relaxing you. Very, very interesting meld of emotions and feelings. Now, I'm actually in the process of trying to open up my own coffee cocktail lounge. So this game came into my life at the perfect time. And something that I'm most excited about is transforming my space into me and my style. So that's been one of my favorite aspects of Love and Pies. I have to show you. I'm watching my cafe transform from this burnt down rubble that it was when I first opened the game into like my thriving little business. Has been so excited. Oh my God, I just got so excited because it said new quests were available and all of my lives are full right now. Look at what we're doing here, you guys. Like this did not look like this. For example, if you can see the screen, there was a lot of burnt down areas. And now look at those people just enjoying their lives in the cafe. They all look like they're having so much fun. I've got a kitchen now. Like I said, can't get enough of it. Can't say enough of it. If you're like me and if you like merge 2 games, decorating things, making it your own, and unbelievable visuals. I'm telling you, I love the visuals. I love the characters. You need to download Love and Pies on iOS or Android, and you can do that through my link below. Like I said, it's free to download, and I am super confident you're going to love it as much as I do. Thank you again, Love and Pies, for being my me time and my space of zen lately, and for sponsoring today's video. Now back to the video. All right, today we definitely need the mental ease of a riddle. So today's riddle is: lovely and round, I'm shimmery white, grown in the darkness, a lady's delight. What am I? All right, as you can tell from the thumbnail, we are talking about serial baby killer. Yeah. Lucy Letby. This is someone who abused her power that was meant to protect and save the most vulnerable of lives, somebody who was once thought of and looked at by her friends and those who knew her as Mary Poppins. This is somebody who, if you just looked at everything about her based on, what was presented on paper, you could never imagine. She just looks like the sweetest, most perfect person to be in the position that she would be in, and never somebody that, was raised to ever show signs of being so heartless and sinister. Basically, Lucy's not like a poster child for someone who you would think of would be capable of murder, let alone being a serial killer. She was born on January 4th, 1990, the only child to her parents, John, who was a finance manager, and Susan Letby, an accounts clerk. Lucy grew up in Hereford. I just wish I could know all the accents, you guys. She grew up on the Welsh marches of Hereford. Somebody please in the comments who's actually from there and has been to London much more than I have. Please tell me how to pronounce it. As a child, she went to another word that I'm going to butcher. Aylestone School, and she's described as a shy but studious schoolgirl. She wanted to learn. She was very keen, and from a young age, as far as her friends could remember, she always wanted to be a nurse. Based on stories from people who knew her, this stemmed from the fact that she had a very difficult birth, and she spoke about how grateful she was to be alive and to the nurses who helped save her life. So this led to her also wanting to return the favor, be a nurse, and everything that she did was always geared towards that ultimate goal of becoming a nurse. So everything that she studied, she was making sure that she was lining her ducks up in a row properly to get to that end goal. Okay, here we go with the Hereford. I gotta learn her. Don't drive me crazy. I wish I'd done this before. Hereford. Okay, now now we know how to pronounce it. So at 16, Lucy attended Hereford Sixth Form College. This is actually also where Ellie Goulding went 3 years prior. I'm a very, very big Ellie Goulding fan. Not relevant to the story, but I had to talk that in there. After graduation, she finally pursued her education in nursing at the University of Chester. She took a course in general nursing in the first year and then specialized in children's nursing for her second and third year. During school, she also did what we call practicums at Liverpool Women's Hospital and the Countess of Chester Hospital. And she was well liked, somebody that residents saw a lot of potential in. During school, she was not described as one of the popular girls. A friend described her as actually quite awkward and a little bit geeky. I don't really like that word, but you know what I mean. Like very, I guess, studious is, I would want to say, is a much sweeter way of saying geeky, because there's a lot of geeks out there and it's okay to be geeky. Regardless, she did have a small group of college friends, and then they called themselves the Mismatch Family because it just kind of felt like they didn't really know where they fit in, but they jived together. Out of that group, everybody says Lucy was definitely the one that was more reserved. While her friends would kind of go out and occasionally drink, it was always her that was leaving first, getting home early to study, which for her goal ultimately paid off. Lucy was the first member of her family to study at university and graduated in September 2011. Her parents were so proud of her accomplishments, so proud of her work, that they even put out a shout out in the Hereford. Now I'm all excited that I can say Hereford. They put out a special message to her in the Hereford Times that said, "Lucy Letby, BSc Ons in child nursing. We are so proud of you after all of your hard work. Love, Mom and Dad." In 2012, she began working as a registered nurse at the neonatal unit in Countess of Chester Hospital in 2012. I think I already said that. And this is actually one of the hospitals where she made a really good impression during her practicum. So that is where she ended up getting a permanent position. There was a little staff profile written up about the nurses in 2013, and under Lucy's, it said that she was responsible for caring for a wide range of babies that required various levels of support, and that she really enjoyed seeing them progress and being there as a comfort and support for the families. Lucy was also a nurse that took part in this campaign to raise funds for a new neonatal unit at the hospital. It sounds like their hospital was one of the ones that definitely needed a little bit of revamping. I know in my city particularly, there's only certain ones that will take premature babies just based on their condition and just feeling that they can't have the proper support that they need. So Lucy was really trying to help get some funding to, up the new neonatal unit so that they could have a wider range of assistance for these babies. In January of that following year, actually, she was offered a position on the neonatal unit. And this is where she would take care of those babies that were unwell, babies that were premature. And she did really, really well. She quickly progressed, qualifying as a Band 5 nurse. And in March 2014, she also completed specialty training to allow her to work with infants in the intensive care. This is where she cared for hundreds of babies on the unit, and Lucy herself said that she was happiest there. She said, quote, "I enjoyed the intensive care work. That was my passion. All nurses on the unit have an area they prefer or excel at. They know I was my happiest here." This wasn't a direct quote from her, but from other people that she spoke to, she said that she found the non-intensive care work boring, and that this is what kind of sparked, let's choke on our spit, sparked her passion. And now this is really interesting because hearing about people explain how she was when she was promoted and how serious she took her job, and then finding out things that we're going to get later on into the episode, it was really interesting to me to find out, because part of that stuck upness, I guess you want to call it, it kind of transcended as her just being very by the book, by the rules. Everything had to be done according to the rules. She was quick to point out when somebody made a mistake. She was always the first one to get upset and confront somebody if they had done something wrong. So given what we know now, or if you have never heard about this case, what we're going to learn later, I found that very surreal, interesting. Outside of her work, Lucy seemed to have just like a typical life of a woman in her mid-20s. She went out, socialized with friends, some of her colleagues on her days off. She went on holidays, and she also attended weekly salsa classes. Now, I read a really great article about this case on the Times, and the reporter on there had spoken to people that knew Lucy, and from their awareness, knowledge, that's the word I'm looking for, from their knowledge, they weren't aware of her having a boyfriend, but there was speculation, especially among the workplace, that she had been seeing a married resident at the hospital who has never been named for legal reasons. Allegedly, these two had gone on a trip to London together. They spent a lot of time together at work, went out for meals, spent time at her house. And those who worked with them definitely sensed like a certain closeness between the two. There was a nurse that Lucy worked with who they both considered each other close friends, that Lucy said that they would send flirty messages back and forth together. She would send hearts to him. She even admitted to looking up his wife on Facebook, and then told this friend that this resident had sent Lucy like this flirty text saying, could you go commando to work? That was really all I have ever seen in terms of like any admittance to somebody, and this never came from Lucy. This was hearsay from a friend of hers saying that she admitted that they sent flirty texts. He asked her to arrive at work without underwear. So there was never any, okay, yeah, this is what's going on to anybody in her life. And she really didn't like that there was speculation on the unit about anything going on. Now, this wasn't the only thing that was causing a stir or any suspicion on the ward. Starting in 2015, multiple babies started dying at the hospital. The first suspicious case happened on June 8th, 2015. It was at 8 p.m. when a healthy baby boy who also happened to be a twin was being cared for in Nursery 1 on the ward, and Lucy was his designated nurse. The baby was given to Lucy to care for after she started a night shift, and this was when the pediatric resident was clocking off. Lucy had already been on shift for about 30 minutes by this point, and 26 minutes later, she calls for a doctor, saying that the baby's state was rapidly deteriorating. 30 minutes later, this, what everybody believed to be healthy baby boy, was dead, and this was 90 minutes into Lucy's shift. It's not to say that these things don't happen, but the reason it stood out was because everybody wasn't expecting it at all, especially the resident who had left and then heard about the death the next day and was just completely shocked. Like, this was absolutely out of the blue and devastating. There was zero signs of any problems with this baby during the day. Both he and his twin sister were doing very well. But if you've known somebody, or if you yourself have multiple babies, there is always that extra concern, extra attention, mostly because a lot of twin or multiple babies are born premature. But just because your baby is premature doesn't always mean that it's detrimental. There's just a lot more eyes and care that is taken. And most often, the outcome is absolutely positive, and these babies are very, very healthy. Now, doctors who attended the scene that evening had said that they noticed that child A, that this is how they referred to the babies, and as we go through the story, it'll go in sequence of the alphabet. So child A had developed unusual blue and white, what they refer to as molting on the skin. It's kind of like marbling, and this is something that they had never seen before. About 28 hours after child A's death, his twin sister, who is referred to as child B, also inexplicably becomes unconscious and has to be resuscitated. It was Lucy Letby who had fed this baby 25 minutes prior to her becoming unconscious, and this child also had the same unusual markings on her skin as her twin brother had. At first, I think the only thing that was probably going on within the ward was just thinking that maybe there was something genetic between these twins that they hadn't identified yet. But a few days later, child C, an unrelated baby, no sibling, it was a baby boy who was also in good condition, also died. Now, it's said that he suddenly became unresponsive after another nurse had left the nursery. And even though Lucy Letby wasn't designated to this baby, she was the one that was standing over his monitor as the alarm was sounding and the other nurses were rushing back in. This was particularly concerning to Lucy's shift manager because I guess she had already spoken to Lucy about just focusing on the patients that were designated to her and to just let the other nurses deal with their baby. Next, on June 22nd, 2015, a baby girl, child D, becomes unresponsive 3 times in the early hours of the 22nd. The staff who also attempted to save this baby's life again noticed this discoloration on her skin. And this time after her death, there was an x-ray that was taken. And in this x-ray, there was this line that looked like a line of gas that was in front of the baby's spine. This is something none of the doctors felt could be explained by natural causes. And the mother of this child had made mention that she was uncomfortable with Lucy Letby hovering over the baby for like hours before the baby passed. So on July 2015, there is a doctor that actually raises concerns over the sudden deaths and need for resuscitation of all of these babies that has never happened that often in the hospital that close together either. At this point, it's just kind of speculation. Everyone's just trying to figure out what's going on, but there is an acknowledgement that there's something not right going on. However, after this is brought up, the suspicious cases all of a sudden stop for about a month. Then, on August 4th, 2015, a mother walked into the unit to give her baby, who was a baby boy named Child E for the records, his milk. And when she arrived, she just sees this horror. Her baby is in distress and he's bleeding from the mouth. This poor baby ended up dying of fatal bleed. There was also flecks of blood that were found in the vomit that he had prior to passing. And the next evening, Child E's brother, who was his twin, Child F, he was being cared for in nursery 2, which was the same room that Lucy was looking after another baby. So this was not her designated baby. And at 1:54 a.m., Child F just experiences this unexpected drop in his blood sugar and a surge on his heart rate monitor. He survived, but he was given a blood test, and in that blood test, it revealed that there was an extremely high amount of synthetic insulin, which was never ordered for him. It wasn't something that he needed. In fact, there was no baby on that unit that was prescribed insulin at that time, so there was literally no reason for it to be on there, or no explanation for like an accidental dosage on confusing the babies in chart. Something else worth noting is that insulin is locked in a fridge that is next to the nurse's station. So again, it couldn't be something that you just accidentally grab and administer. At this point, another doctor had tried to go to superiors and just express frustration and the fact that he wasn't happy with Lucy working on the unit. There was just something about the fact that all of this was happening so suddenly. It had never been something that he had seen before, and he was kind of seeing like what the common denominator was in it, and it was Lucy. But he was quickly dismissed and basically said, like, that's speculation, and how dare you think about someone like that? Like, we cannot throw out accusations like this. On September 7th, 2015, there was kind of like a little makeshift celebration. Some banners were put up. A cake was made for the parents of a little baby girl referred to as Baby G, because this was the 100th day of her being alive and doing very well. On that same day, the child becomes unresponsive. She did so on 2 other occasions in the following 3 weeks, but she was able to be resuscitated. After the first collapse, though, she was taken to Arrow Park Hospital where she was cared for. Then she was returned, and 5 days after, she became unconscious again, and this was 15 minutes after Lucy had fed this baby. After all of that, after weeks of being unresponsive, being resuscitated, this child survived. However, she is now severely disabled as a result of what happened to her. It was Lucy Letby who had made the call for help with this baby's condition. And when doctors arrived, they said that they witnessed the baby projectile vomit. If you have children, if you've been around children, you know that can be something that happens. Sometimes they're just from projectile vomit. But this was on another level. This had reached like across the room onto like a chair next to the cot. So like across the room. And the doctor who had witnessed this said that they had never seen something like that before. Her heart rate and oxygen levels had also dropped concerningly low. And as the doctors caring for the babies, trying to figure out like what could have caused this, and there was just like no natural explanation for vomiting that intensely. Now, after one of those first calls for the need for assistance and resuscitation for this baby, one of the first nurses that arrived noticed that the machine that was connected to the baby to measure her oxygen saturation levels and her heart rate, it had been turned off. Not only that, but she also made the connection that the initial day that the baby became unconscious, that happened on the exact day that was originally supposed to be this premature baby's due date. Super unsettling, and I can't even imagine what would run through your head trying to talk yourself out of thinking that there is anything correlating to that and that something dark is happening. About 6 weeks after child G's multiple collapses and needs for resuscitation, but ultimate survival, child I passes away on October 23rd, 2015. This baby girl had also collapsed multiple times. This was the fourth time she had to be resuscitated. And on the fourth time, it was Nurse Lucy Letby that was found by another nurse next to the baby's incubator. 2 times they found that the baby had excess air in the stomach, which was affecting her ability to breathe, thus rendering her unconscious. When what was brought up by one of the nurses was that before the second collapse, Lucy had said to a colleague of hers that the baby had looked pale. This statement seemed odd to her as she's walking to go and check on this baby because it was hard to see from where you would be standing in the doorway looking in this dark nursery whether the baby was pale or not. So it's like, oh, you should go check on the baby. She looks pale. And then when the designated nurse for this child arrives, turns the light on, sees that the baby is not breathing. Even though Lucy wasn't designated to this baby, she wanted to attend the funeral. She also sent a sympathy card to the parents on the day of the baby's funeral, which, might seem like a kind gesture, I suppose. But this mother already felt uncomfortable about Lucy. I think probably it would be safe to say like even more uncomfortable because this was the nurse that she remembered almost feeling like she saw a smile on her face as she was helping to bathe the baby after the baby had already passed and offered to take photos for her of the baby who had passed being bathed. After this child's passing, another doctor had noticed again this skin marbling on the baby's skin, and then an x-ray had showed that the child had a massively enlarged stomach that to them felt was consistent with her having been deliberately injected with air. Later on in the day of child I's death, there was concerns brought to the hospital management about these ongoing suspicious deaths of these babies. There were staff reviews that were brought forward, and in most of them, they highlighted that Lucy was always on shift during these suspicious incidents. However, they're again told not to make a fuss. There is no evidence to substantiate these suspicions and concerns. It's not until February 2016 that another doctor feels encouraged enough, I guess, because how else are you supposed to continue raising concerns when your higher ups, your superiors are just telling you, like, we absolutely can't think of that. Then you probably feel like, yeah, you're right. This is speculation. How terrible of me. But then you still have this inkling and this concern in you. So it actually goes on into the next year, into February, where another doctor finally requests again an urgent meeting with executives to talk about these concerns, but no meeting happens until February 2016. Now, by April 2016, Lucy had been moved to day shifts. The way I understood it was basically like her clerk, her superior on the unit, kind of trying to appease any type of concern, but not actually reprimand her in any way. Just be like, okay, like maybe it's just an issue with the nurses in the team that you're working with right now. Let's move you to day shifts. At this point, when no collapses, no deaths were happening during the day, they started happening during the daytime. On April 9th, 2016, two twin boys both needed to be resuscitated within hours of one another. Blood tests taken to find out what they could identify and manage for these twin boys showed that child L had outrageously high insulin levels. They were so high, they were at the top of the scale of the equipment, like that the equipment was able measuring. So it could have gone on higher. It's just that was what the equipment was able to measure, and it was at the very top. Hours later, his twin, child M, his heart rate and breathing all of a sudden dropped. He nearly died. And it was later suspected that this most likely was caused by air being injected into his bloodstream. Although he lived, he also now suffers from brain damage. Something that's really, I don't even have a word to explain it. I keep wanting to say sinister because in my mind, I'm just like, like, oh, like this is like, that's like, like the cat, monstrous, I guess is another word. But even that just like doesn't explain it, but we'll use sinister in this case, is that if you go back to the collapses of baby L and baby M, they were almost identical as baby E and baby F, who were both twins, where one had this unusual high dose of insulin that was not required, and the other showing test results with air in the body. Now, child F had survived his injection of insulin, and then it was noted that child L had been injected with twice the dose, suggesting that if this was deliberate and there was a correlation between the two, it was to ensure that there was death on that occasion. Finally, there is a meeting about all of the suspicious cases going on in the hospital. This happens on May 11th, but after all of the concerns are brought up, there is no action taken. A month after that, child N almost dies after suffering severe trauma to the throat. Doctors say that when they went to assist the baby, they saw blood and then an unusual amount of swelling at the back of the throat upon examination. This is something that's extremely hard to try to explain, especially when these babies are, a baby in general is just like cared for so tenderly. And you have to keep in mind that these babies are preemie babies in the neonatal unit in intensive care. So there's extra care and caution. How could there be trauma, swelling, bleeding at the back of the throat when you're just in this little incubator being cared for so gently? The final two cases, they happened within hours of each other on June 23rd and 24th. There were two children that were involved in this incident, but they were two of triplets. Child O is described as a perfectly healthy baby and is actually expected to be discharged quite soon, but then all of a sudden collapses on June 23rd. Now, when this child initially became unwell and there was a concern through the staff, one of the nurses suggested that this baby be transferred to nursery 1, which is where they had the sickest babies. But Lucy disagreed. She wanted the baby designated to her to stay. Less than 2 hours after that recommendation, and then Lucy asking for the baby to stay, the baby becomes unresponsive. He's resuscitated, but needs to be resuscitated another 2 times after again becoming unresponsive another 2 times, and ultimately dies about 3 hours after the initial call for help. I think it's worth noting that this actually occurred on Lucy's first shift back after she returned from a trip to Ibiza, and that as she was texting a colleague of hers talking about her return to work, she said that she was going to be coming back with a bang. Now, the x-rays on this baby are just heartbreaking and also infuriating. The x-rays showed that there was an abnormal amount of gas in the baby's body, and that he had liver damage that an independent pathologist later ruled was an impact injury so severe that it was similar to what you see in a car crash. 13 minutes after baby O's death, Lucy Letby was feeding his triplet brother, baby P. This baby was also expected to go home very soon, but he also suddenly goes unconscious after his diaphragm was unexplainably shattered. There was an urgent attempt to prepare him to go to another hospital, and as the doctors are in the midst of all of this chaos doing this, one of them remembers Lucy saying something along the lines of, he's not leaving here alive, is he? And she was right. He died soon after. His x-ray also showed an unexplainable amount of gas inside his little body. And after these deaths, this is what was described as the tipping point, when doctors came together and were like, something drastic needs to happen now. They again bring their concerns. They bring up that still the common denominator here is Nurse Lucy Letby. 3 weeks later, she is removed from duty, and all of a sudden the suspicious deaths and collapses of these babies stop. I think something worth noting as well is just in that final coming together of the doctors and their colleagues going to the trust with these concerns was that a misconception with sick babies is that at any moment they can become unconscious and need intervening, or that they'll just die unexplainably. But usually if there is a cause for concern and there's extra care and attention that needs to be had, it's identified before that collapse happens or before that death happens, and it can be treated and prevented. Also, in the rare cases, very rare cases that it isn't predicted, there is usually a medical explanation that can be found and treated. Unlike all of these cases, there was no explanation found. That everybody's just sitting there puzzled, like, what's going on? What happened? They were perfectly healthy. Like, this just doesn't happen out of the blue like this, and this often. I can't say for certain that it seemed like after Lucy was finally dismissed of her duties and taken off shift at this time, that everybody was kind of like knowing that they had to collectively come together, or at least try to provide information to substantiate these suspicions. But it kind of seemed like that, given that there had been multiple attempts to raise concerns and it had been dismissed. So it was almost like there were multiple areas of the ward and of the field, doctors that were nurses, other colleagues that were kind of accumulating their, I guess, evidence or their suspicions. And each of them independently, the only thing that they could link to all of this was that Lucy had been the only staff member that was consistently on shift through every one of these incidences. Sorry, we're kind of jumping back here, you guys. I don't want to confuse you at all, but I'm also wanting just to touch on a little bit about like some of what they were up against in terms of voicing these concerns. And in one of those meetings in 2006, there was a hospital visit by the Quality Care Commission, and these concerns were brought up at that point. But their report said that they didn't believe that it was like one person responsible, and that the identifying issues of these deaths or collapses was short staffing and skill mix issues within the unit. The lead neonatologist had actually phoned the duty executive, insisting, Lucy has to be removed from this unit altogether. And she refused. She actually said that Lucy was absolutely safe to work and that she was happy. She, not Lucy, but she, the director, was happy to take responsibility if anything happened to any more babies in Lucy's care. Remember, by this point, 7 unexplained deaths had taken place on that unit. Then, after all of these concerns are now officially out there because Lucy had already been transferred from evening to day shifts and then taken off day shifts altogether, she is then placed back into the hospital, but she was transferred to the patient experience team. This was something that she was not happy about, and in September 2006, she actually raised a formal complaint. Her complaint was upheld by the board, and in January 2017, it determined that her removal had been orchestrated by the doctors with no hard evidence. The board supported her return to the neonatal unit. They offered her a placement at another hospital. This is actually one of the hospitals where the babies that were too premature for the hospital and current unit that she was on were being transferred to, so even more vulnerable. The chief executive of the board also met with Lucy and her parents to apologize on behalf of the trust and the board and assured them that the doctors who had made these allegations against her were going to be dealt with. Those doctors were ordered to send a letter of an apology to Lucy, which they did in February 2017. I can only imagine what a slap in the face that would have felt like for these people who are not by any means on a witch hunt, but are being made out to look that way. And even though they tried to do their best to protect like their profession, their hospital, they didn't want to involve police. They wanted an internal investigation done, and they wanted the right thing to be done. At this point, after having to apologize and have her transferred to a more vulnerable hospital, they decided in March 2017 to finally involve the police. The police investigation was officially launched, and it was called Operation Hummingbird. And they went into it with just their initial focus was like around the hypothesis of what could have occurred. It wasn't to go directly to what the suspicions of those coming to them were. So it was like, okay, we need to pour through all of these records. Were these natural deaths? Was it natural collapses? Was it a virus? Or ultimately, if we can check all of those, no, was this deliberate harm? Their investigation went on for over a year, and in July 2018, July 3rd, 2018, they came to the same conclusion that a lot of people had speculated. These deaths, in their opinion, were intentional, and the only common factor was that Lucy Letby was always on shift and often in the room as the signs of decline in these babies started. She was arrested on suspicion of 8 counts of murder and 6 counts of attempted murder. She had actually just returned from a family holiday on the English Riviera, and her father was at her house staying there in the spare bedroom at the time, so he was there during this arrest. After her arrest, this gave the chance for investigators to go even deeper into the investigation than they already had, because now they were able to search her home and her parents' home. And I can only imagine like what the scene would have been like arresting her and then going through the home, because like I said at the beginning, there's like, this is not a blueprint for what you would expect. She's no poster child for these allegations and charges against her. Her house was like decorated with stuffed animals and like Disney figurines. She also had like those types of signs around her house that say like love sparkles wherever you go. They also found diaries, and within the diaries, it almost seemed like there was these like color coded asterisks that kind of lined up with significant points of this investigation, meaning she was following kind of like what was going on in the internal investigations over the month period where people were trying to have her removed from the unit. And then after finding out that there was police involvement, those types of things. So they're like, okay, so now there's like also additional aspects to this investigation because it's like she's following along. And shortly after her arrest, she actually posted bail. So then their investigation became even more convoluted because they're like, okay, well, she's keeping tabs on stuff. She's out on bail, and they wanted to see like what more she would, I guess, like write down or lead them to. Just to show you how intense this investigation was and how much they went to go through, there were over 16,000 pieces of evidence in their exhibit. And even though she had already had that initial arrest and charge, she was still out on bail. But even then, as they're going through things, as they're finding more stuff, the lead investigators are still saying that they're constantly asking themselves, like, is there enough? That's normal in any case. You collect evidence, you make sure that your case is strong enough to go to trial and that it's going to actually stick. And they're almost like testing themselves, figuring out like, okay, if it's not her, like who else can it be? Are we going to find something that's actually going to lead to somebody else or another explanation? But time and time again, they couldn't. And then by that point on November 11th, 2020, she was then charged with 8 counts of murder. They were actually able to prove that there were more deaths that she was responsible for and 10 counts of attempted murder. After this arrest, she was denied bail. And Lucy herself denied all 22 charges against her. She blamed the deaths of these babies on hospital hygiene and staffing issues. So since she was pleading her innocence, she went to trial. Her trial began on October 10th, 2022. During the trial, the identities of the babies, their families, were not released to the public. I can absolutely respect that. There were several witnesses that also requested to stay anonymous. One of them was the doctor that Lucy allegedly was having an affair with, and it's also kind of gone that like, he was not interested at all and she was infatuated him. Nonetheless, he also remains unnamed. A huge part of this trial for the prosecution was testimony from not just her colleagues, but also these babies' parents. And that is the part of researching and stuff that just gets you because it makes it so much more real and you just feel their pain. Many of their testimonies was that they could hear their babies screaming and they would make their way to the nurseries. And time again, these parents don't know each other. These are happening in different months. It's Lucy Letby that they often walk into standing over the babies. Often they were told by Lucy just to go back to the room and that she would deal with it, only to find out minutes later that their baby had passed. There was also testimony from the mother of the baby who had passed, and Lucy was there to watch her give her dead baby a bath in these final moments, which are just like, ugh, I can't even imagine. And this mother is saying that this woman, Lucy, is sitting over me talking about how she was present for the first bath as well and how much her daughter just loved it. And she's just like sitting there like, will you fucking stop talking? Then she went on, as we talked about earlier, adding salt to the wound by sending them a sympathy card, wanting to go to the funeral. And after her arrest, it was found on her cell phone that she had actually photographed the sympathy card and kept it on her phone. She had also looked up multiple families on the anniversary of these babies' deaths on Facebook to check in. When investigators had asked her, why are you looking into these families? In total, I believe there were 11 families that she had searched on Facebook on significant dates, and her response was that she didn't really have an explanation why she did it. Now, prosecution believes there were several methods that were used to harm these babies, ultimately kill many of these babies. There were a few tests that showed the loops of gas that filled the bowel, which was consistent with a baby being injected with air. It's believed this air was injected into their bloodstream. Other methods that they believed she used were high doses of insulin, and then also overfeeding the babies in their feeding tubes. That would explain why doctors had seen babies vomit so intensely that it was shooting across the room. Nothing like that they had ever seen before. And what they also found was that she was altering their charts and their records, showing that their temperatures were a little bit off when she had checked them, even though it wasn't in that state prior to arrival. And so when the next nurse coming on would go and tend to the baby, it would almost look like it had happened on that nurse's watch. She would also not mark on the chart that she had fed the babies. Often she wasn't supposed to feed these babies because they were not assigned to her. So she would overfeed the baby, and then their nurse would come on and then feed them, thus making it look like it was this nurse that was incompetent and overfed this child, leading to its demise or sudden decline in its health. Now, Lucy's defense said that she was simply this dedicated nurse that involved herself or became victim to a system that had failed. Really, the only thing that they tried to explain having a justifiable explanation for was the extraordinary amount of bleeding in one of the babies. The defense said that this could have been caused by the tube or like a rigid wire. But when it came to other things like the gas found in the babies and high levels of insulin, there was really no explanation. Even Lucy, when she was questioned about it, said that there was no explanation, and that insulin was kept in a lock-safe fridge on the nurse's unit. None of the babies on that unit were prescribed insulin, so there should have been no reason for any of the babies, especially the babies that she was caring for, to have insulin in her body and in their body, and she just didn't know how it could have happened. And hey, you know what? I could say, just if I was a juror, all right, that's fair. It could have been somebody else. She could be right. She could have had no idea what was causing this, why there would be insulin in a baby who did not require insulin's body. But there were some unsettling pieces of evidence that were found at her house along with her parents' house that led people to believe that she was actually much more aware of what was going on than she was admitting. Prosecution had presented a number of handwritten notes from Lucy's bedroom that said things like, "I'm evil. I did this." She wrote, "I killed them on purpose because I couldn't take care of them." There were other notes that said, "I killed them and I'll never marry or have children. I'll never know what it's like to have a family." Now, the defense argued that these notes were just proof of her in anguish, and she's this young woman who is in fear of all of these allegations that are being said about her. They felt that they had also some notes that supported that. They showed notes that said why and how could this happen, what allegations are being made and by who, and do they have written evidence to support their comments. She also wrote a note that said, I haven't done anything wrong and they have no evidence. So why do I have to hide away? There could be an argument for both sides presenting that, the evidence that they did. However, police also discovered that Lucy had stolen medical documents and were keeping them at her house relating to the care of these babies and their charts. There were over 250 sheets that were found. These are confidential. These are never, ever supposed to leave a hospital. And on them, there were the resuscitation sheets, the blood result sheets, the gas reading sheets. And to the prosecution, their argument was that she was very well aware what she was doing. There's zero explanation why those should have ever left the hospital. And the reason they did leave the hospital and that they were found in Lucy Letby's home is because they were essentially like a trophy. Not only did she have them in her home, but I found it so disturbing that she had them hidden under her bed, like where she sleeps every single night. They also found within her diary that there were markings of the initials of the babies on the days that they had died. Also tucked in those diaries were notes that she had written kind of like she was speaking to these children. There was a note that said, I'm sorry that you couldn't have a chance at life. I don't want to do this anymore. How can it be this way? I hate my life. And help in capital letters. Now, Lucy's explanation of this when she testified in court was that she was made to feel as though she was incompetent. She never meant any harm. And she was saying, like, I'm evil. I did this because she felt like, okay, well, if somebody feels like I'm doing something wrong and this is happening on all of my shifts, then I'm the one that's responsible. She went on to be super emotional, wanting breaks, describing the deterioration of her mental health, that nobody can be accused of something more horrific in life, and that she changed as a person. She isolated herself. And it was noted that this was really the one of the only times that she ever showed emotion. There was never any emotion whatsoever when there was really, really heartbreaking testimony from not just the parents of these babies, but also professionals and explaining what they went through, particularly when they were explaining what happens if you're injected with air. You're basically experiencing an intense heart attack. They would hear screams of these babies on the wards for like up to 30 minutes, which usually in a preemie ward is not very common. They don't cry very much. And so like these blood curdling screams, it's the pain that they're feeling of going through a heart attack. Like they're in severe pain. And even then, there was no emotion. It was just when she was talking about herself, and also when the doctor that she was allegedly having an affair with also testified. Her trial went on for around 9 months, and on July 10th, 2023, the jury was sent to deliberate. The way it worked was the jury came back like during several days to give their verdict. So it started on August 8th, and then it wasn't until 10 days later on August 18th that the final verdicts were made, and then that was made public. Lucy was found guilty of 7 counts of murder. She was also found guilty of 7 counts of attempted murder. With the other cases, the jury were just unable to come to a unanimous decision, which I can imagine is just really upsetting to those family members. But hopefully they have some peace knowing that on August 21st, 2023, she was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order, which I'm assuming is without the possibility of parole terms for UK law. I think something that so many people are just left reeling from is what is the motive? What in God's green earth could ever possess you to want to, first of all, harm anybody, but the most vulnerable of humankind, our little, tiny little babies? Why? 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 And there's been several theories of her motives. Obviously, Lucy is maintaining her innocence, so there has been nothing that has come from her, but it goes everywhere from she got a thrill over it and kind of like to have this playing God complex. Another theory was that she was trying to gain attention of this married doctor. It was presented in trial that she used to text him nonstop during some of the night shifts, and this would be like even minutes before some of these attacks. There's also been speculation that there are like very concerning parallels to a case in the 1990s, the Beverly Allitt case, and that maybe Lucy was trying to have like a copycat of what transpired then. Beverly had also attacked over a dozen infants in her care while she was also working as a nurse in England. And allegedly the methods that she used were also almost identical to the deaths of these babies that Lucy has now been convicted of doing. As of August 2023, when this is being researched, there is allegedly an ongoing police investigation looking into other hospitals that Lucy would have trained at, other suspicious deaths that she could have been involved in, involving babies. So I kind of like made it seem like she had a broader victim range. From what I know, there's around 4,000 cases that are being looked into right now. Now, since Lucy had stopped working at the Countess of Chester Hospital, there has only been one death in 7 years on her unit. I think it's relevant to note that the unit hasn't cared for such sick babies. Even when they had, though, they usually only saw around about 2 or 3 deaths a year, not like in a week. This case has urged calls for stricter regulations and not only holding somebody like Lucy Letby accountable, but for all of the superiors and higher ups that continue to just dismiss these speculations. One of the pediatricians, who's actually one of the prosecution witnesses, has called for an investigation to the possibility of charges of manslaughter for those who did not take quick action and just dismiss this regarding the Lucy Letby case. And as harsh as that sounds, like I absolutely stand and would support that, because you have to learn from something like this. This is just unimaginable. Nothing like this can ever happen again. And unfortunately, it takes somebody to make an example of. And there are a lot of people in this situation to be made examples of. Now, just last week, it was announced that the nursing director at the hospital that Lucy was working at, who had stood by her, has been suspended of her job. At this time, the government is also reportedly looking into how Lucy's pension can be stopped, because I think like due to certain regulations, like there's actually a possibility that even if you had a conviction, you could still receive it. So they're looking into that. Now, before wrapping up, I do want to mention that you may come across a lot of hashtags that are out there that specifically on TikTok that are alleging that Lucy Letby has been railroaded, and this was a witch hunt and that she's innocent. A lot of people believe that she was wrongfully convicted, including some of her friends who still to this day stand behind her. And some of the quotes have been, unless she just outright comes and says, like, I did this, I'm guilty, I'll never believe it. She could never do anything like this. I've known her all of my life, and all of her life, she's only wanted to care for babies, like she would never harm them. those who know her also accuse the police of trying to build a case around her and just blame her. And I mean, I can understand disbelief and shock that you would feel if this was somebody that you knew. If you are one of those people who knew this person, there's absolutely no way you would ever want to accept that somebody that you loved and that you were close with would ever be capable of something on the magnitude of this monstrosity. There's also this underlying probably feeling of guilt, and it could be a feeling that you don't even recognize, wondering, what did I miss? How could you not see these signs? Could I have prevented something? And you just would never want to admit that there is something that you could do. And really there isn't. Look, there are so many cases. I mean, right off the top of my head, Dennis Rader comes to mind. He's explained as like a great dad. He's like the leader of his church. Meanwhile, he's out there doing just like the most horrific crimes. No one sees signs and wants to accept that, yeah, I knew this was coming. The brutal fact is that there are people like this out. This happens, and it could be somebody that you know. And I do not believe that the police in any way railroaded an innocent nurse. I mean, their investigation initially was a year long, and then they even further took like another year to go through everything to make sure that every stone was turned, not unturned. Like I said, though, there is a hashtag going out there that says hashtag Lucy Letby is innocent. It's accumulated a lot of views, I think millions of views, likes, comments on TikTok, and they're comparing her case to like Amanda Knox right now. There was also a fundraising campaign started by a woman in the US. Apparently, she has no connection to Lucy or the hospital, but believes that she is innocent and is trying to raise money to prove the innocence. Or, I mean, who knows? Also, in my opinion, could be just trying to capitalize and raise money to do no good. To me, the evidence spoke loud and clear, and I would think that it also did the same for these babies' families, and that's who I think of when I see those types of things being put out there, because it just brings it back up. And I really want that to be something that everybody's mindful of. Be mindful of your words. Last week's case, I knew it was like a little bit could be controversial. I didn't expect to see the amount of victim blaming that I did in the comments. And although I can't morally say that I would have made the decision that victim had in terms of her relationship choice, that in no way like changes the case itself or the fact that she did not deserve what happened to her based on the person she chose to pursue. Like, it's not our job to judge. Victims' families often come across their loved ones' cases, and this needs to be a safe space for them and for everybody else. So I just wanted to finish off with that. Those are my thoughts. I'd love to know what you think, please, in keeping in mind about it being like a respectful conversation. And yeah, thank you guys for sticking with me through this case today. It was a heavy one. This was a really, really heavy one to research. So apologies if I'm kind of like just a little bit scrambly and all over the place. I'm kind of trying to not allow myself to get too emotional. And in doing so, you get a little bit nervous. And anyways, I'm also just like kind of like a cluster F all the time. So that's really not an excuse, but you know what I mean. All right. That's it for me today. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to me. I love and I appreciate you so freaking much. I will see you in the next video. I will miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself. And I just realized I didn't give you the answer to today's riddle. Okay, so quick refresher. Lovely and round, I'm shimmery white. Thrown in the darkness, a lady's delight. What am I? And the answer is a pearl. Okay. All right, guys, that's it for me. I love you so much. I will see you in the next video.